Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Milby. I'm the Senior Director of Programs at Elevate. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to today's virtual panel discussion, which is titled Powerless: The People's Struggle for Energy. We're here to explore a critical issue, energy insecurity, and explore how it impacts communities across the country, from large urban centers like Chicago, where I'm calling in from today, to rural towns and neighborhoods of all types nationwide. We're going to dig into what's driving these challenges, and most importantly, what's being done or what can be done to solve them. We're honored to be joined by three leaders who bring deep insight and passion to this work. Dr. Ann Evans, CEO of Elevate, Dr. Diana Hernández, Associate Professor at Columbia University, Commissioner Angela Tovar, Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Chicago. Thank you all for joining. Together, we're going to discuss how partnerships across nonprofits, academia, and government are not just responding to energy insecurity, but working to overcome it. So a couple quick notes before we begin, just logistics. We ask that you remain muted throughout the event to minimize any disruptions. We'll have plenty of time for audience Q&A after the panel, so please feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any point during the conversation. We'll be reading through them in the background, and we'll bring them to the panel during the Q&A. Now, let's get started and dive into this important conversation. So we're going to begin with a foundational question for all the panelists. And panelists, I'd also appreciate it if you could provide a brief introduction to yourself before answering this first question. We're going to start with Dr. Hernández, and then Commissioner Tovar, and then Dr. Evans. The first question is, what made you interested in researching energy insecurity in the first place?
Thanks so much, Mark, for moderating, and thank you to Elevate for hosting this event. And I'm so honored and really feel so blessed to be on a panel with Dr. Ann Evans and Angela Tovar for this. So what got me into energy insecurity work? I mean, I think honestly, it has everything to do with just being a community-based researcher, someone who really has always privileged the lived experience of people that are socioeconomically disadvantaged. I grew up myself in the South Bronx in subsidized housing, and that really had shaped my lens in life and how I think about the role of academic research. But it was sitting in people's homes. First for the work that I had been doing for my dissertation research, but then over the course of my career, it's been, I feel like an upwards of like 1,000 different homes and surveys and interactions that I've had with people over the course of their lives. Over the course of my career, and realized that people are actually experiencing a phenomenon with a lot of shared characteristics, and I believe them. And even when it wasn't necessarily in the academic literature or well characterized as kind of a concept, to me, it was a priority because it was a truth that not only people were sharing with me, but that I was also observing while I was interviewing people in their homes. And so for me, that work has started probably for the last 15 years, and it's been kind of entrenched and confirmed in many places over the course of my career.
Thanks so much. 1,000 homes. Wow. We're going to talk more about that in a second. Commissioner Tovar?
Sure, and thanks. And I'll just start by saying it's so I'm so excited to be here for this discussion. And thanks for facilitating, Mark. Anne and Diana are two individuals who I admire greatly in this work, and have had the privilege of partnering with both of them over many years, to address this issue. For me personally, and I know, Mark, you mentioned this, I've served as the city's chief sustainability officer now since 2020. So I've been in this role for a while, and have worked on a wide range of strategies, in partnership with Elevate and people across the city to address energy insecurity. And my work predates that, right? Diana and I have partnered, with her work. As she mentioned, she's a community-based researcher, which I think is an important distinction. As someone with her own personal lived experience, as well as, living in and researching and understanding the lived experience of her neighbors. That has been a really intentional approach in terms of how she understands and uplifts some of what people are experiencing within their own communities. And so her and I have worked together. Prior to coming back to Chicago, I was born and raised here. Her and I had the opportunity to partner as she was, really illuminating the issues of energy insecurity within the South Bronx. And at the time, I was working. I worked for two organizations over the course of about 10 years in the Bronx. One of them being an organization that no longer exists called Sustainable South Bronx. And then later I transitioned to another organization called the Point Community Development Corporation. In both of those roles in those organizations, I was working on energy, primarily through a program called Green Jobs, Green New York, which is a state-funded program that provided, free energy assessments to individuals for individuals within the city of New York, and then incentives for low-income customers to make transitions to more energy efficient and clean energy technologies. There were so many barriers to success there, right? And really understanding how to support people, and their and even through that program and offering some incentives, right? There are so many hurdles that we need to address, which I know that we're going to get into later. Um, I think that was my first experience in using that terminology, but certainly energy insecurity as a concept. I think in just growing up in Chicago on the on the southeast side, it's certainly something that I think is very common. With my neighbors, with people growing up. I remember it just even in my own experience, in living in my household, not having air conditioning in my house. And in the summer during like like a heat wave, like what we're experiencing now, having one air conditioning unit, right, and just having a blanket that my mom would I guess it was nailed right to the wall, and it would just drape on, just we had one air conditioning unit. So the whole house wasn't cooled off, right, but just this room. And it was that blanket that was keeping the cool air from flowing out. And I think as I've talked to neighbors, both in the Bronx and then of course here in Chicago in this capacity, that's so common, right? Or oftentimes the mayor talks about having the orange cord that his neighborhood would share, right? Like his neighbor would share to another neighbor if somebody's utilities were cut off. And that's so common within our communities. And it's something that, maybe we're not using that terminology, but I think anybody who has experienced, that grew up in a low income household, it's certainly something that's we commonly experience. And so, that exposure is something that I think I grew up with before even using that term or, recognizing the importance of addressing this.
Thank you. The visual of sharing the orange cord is certainly really powerful and relevant to this discussion. Dr. Evans?
Hello, everyone. I too am so excited and grateful that I get to share this time with Diana and Angela, two incredibly brilliant leaders who have influenced me and continue to influence me and make change in this world. When I first met Diana and was first exposed to the concept of energy insecurity, I had come with my limited knowledge around energy burden, and we were exploring together with a group of people this concept of concepts around energy and equity. And Diana really opened my eyes to the breadth of what energy insecurity means, all the way from the stress of managing multiple bills, and how people in all their strength and beauty manage to come up with solutions like Angela's mom to keep their families healthy and safe. And there's so much more that I'm really excited to explore. And I just also want to say that when Diana says she's a community-based researcher, she really means it. So as at Elevate, when we wanted to explore more about energy insecurity in Chicago, she this is the first time I've ever experienced this with an academic partner. She came in and taught us and sat by our sides as we learned how to listen to the community and lift up their experiences. I also just want to um, say to Angela, thank you for your service. Thank you as a resident of Chicago. Thank you for your leadership and thank you for your service. You are leading through an incredibly important time as we've reestablished the Department of Environment after many, many years, and you continue to advance really important policy and build a really fantastic team at the same time. And thank you for your ongoing partnership. We look forward to everything that we can all do together, because I do think it takes a village to move things forward, and we at Elevate are committed to doing that. We believe that everyone deserves healthy, safe, affordable heat, power, water, and cooling in their homes. And yet I can say today that there are more than 30 million households who are making decisions as the heat wave marches across the country about whether or not they're going to be able to keep their families cool. Even if they may not have air conditioning or a way to cool, because there's other ways to cool. They're not only concerned about paying utility bills, they're also concerned about the debt that is burdening households. And I also know it absolutely does not need to be this way. This is a problem that we can solve. We know how to implement programs. We know how to deploy technology. We just have to make the decision to stand together and move forward and implement clean energy upgrades, clean water upgrades that help BIPOC communities that have been historically disinvested, and communities that are on the front lines of experiencing energy insecurity.
Thank you so much, Anne. Great points. And let's dive into some of these more detailed questions. So the first question we have prepared is for Dr. Hernández. You mentioned in your opening remarks that you began your focus on this work many years ago. And your book shares that not only do 1 in 10 households experience energy insecurity, but 4 in 10 are at risk. So the question is, how do you think this crisis has remained so invisible to policymakers and including the general public?
So let me just say that, there's something about quantifying an experience that is very important. And this book really takes 3, kind of approaches. One is having done in-depth interviews around the country with households, 100 interviews with impacted households. And that really meant like getting a sense of what's happening in places like Montana and Arizona and Puerto Rico and California and Memphis and Philadelphia, like Detroit, New York City, a real kind of survey of sorts, because we understand that energy insecurity is one of those issues that morphs. It morphs because it is bound by the geography that like basically will impact temperature, but also the housing stock and the energy sources and costs. So in Alabama, where they have rural electric co-ops, and in Texas, where they were fracking, these are places that had different energy dynamics, right? So part of the invisibility of this issue is not only that it happens behind closed doors, and that people like Angela's mom, for instance, are taking matters into their own hands, managing their consumption very carefully, sometimes to prevent those big bills from happening, oftentimes at the expense of health and safety. So the book itself is the goal of it is to better characterize what we actually mean by energy insecurity. And it's not necessarily enough to be precise in terms of a terminology, but also in terms of the methodologies and like the ability to actually measure what we now know in quantifiable ways. So I think about this as like I had done this study in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and I call that the incidental finding. I was doing a study about something completely different. It was about how legal services could help mitigate the relationship between poor housing and poor health. That study was really informative because it kind of like this energy issue was like an emergent issue that showed up. And then the follow-up was this like national study on which the book is then based. And we follow the interviews up with two national surveys, one that I designed and administered, and then one that relies on government surveys. And what we do now, because I've spoken to enough people to like and took the time to identify the essential elements of energy insecurity, which I'd like to kind of go over in a second. But then also then use that to say, how do we pick this up in these representative samples? And how do those representative samples not only help us to understand the prevalence of energy insecurity in the US population, but also to understand the kind of social and health consequences, those adverse outcomes that are associated with energy insecurity. So I want to kind of go a little bit deeper into like what energy insecurity is, its essential elements, and then I want to talk about some of the kind of interesting outcomes that we found as a result of exposure to energy insecurity. So there are three. So my early work kind of had established that energy insecurity has three dimensions. There's an economic dimension, a physical dimension, and a coping dimension. And that economic dimension on the essential elements now, we go deeper. So we now can characterize it as difficulty paying utilities. So energy burden is basically a metric that says if you pay 6% or more of your household income toward energy, then you are energy burdened. With energy insecurity, it's a little more subjective, but based on late and missed payments. Like, are you actually unable to keep up with your energy bills? The other kind of economic indicator is debt. So have you accrued utility debt? And then the third one is a disconnection notice or disconnection, because of course that is the crisis point of energy insecurity when people are shut off due to these kind of economic, but they're mounting economic hardships. Then there's the physical piece, which has to do with the housing setting. And then one new insight around power outages. So if inefficiencies and deficiencies in the housing environment in terms of energy infrastructure, like whether or not people have a working furnace, for instance, or if their home is inefficient, like those are the kinds of things that not only contribute to higher costs, but also make it much more challenging to achieve thermal comfort. And one of the other instances that is more driven by climate change and also how our energy infrastructure itself is insecure are power outages. So oftentimes we have kind of had climate issues and housing issues and economic issues all be like kind of separated. But the truth is that when they are connected to one's ability to meet their energy needs, which is a definition of energy insecurity, then a power outage, especially an extended power outage, definitely qualifies as an insecurity. And then on the coping side, this is the preventive work or the responsive work. So the preventive work is the kind of efforts, and I like to call it work because anybody that understands what it is to live through energy insecurity knows that preventing or responding to it takes a lot of effort. And that work, but also the agency and the control that people basically express when they are managing those circumstances looks like trade-offs between basic needs, like the food, medicine, transportation, like rent this month, pass up on the bill next month because I have to, like take care of my family, like clothing needs and things like that. Like those basic needs are basically being traded off all the time. But then there's also discomfort and intentional discomfort. Like how many families are living with extreme indoor temperature because they're too afraid to turn the thermostat up or down, and afraid because they're afraid of the bill, essentially. But then also the dangerous alternatives when they're heating and cooling systems, for instance, and their heating systems, I think in particular, are out of order. It's using the stove or oven for heat. It's using a space heater for heat, which also then introduces that dangerous alternative piece is really critical because that in and of itself becomes an adverse environmental exposure. And then the other piece is underconsumption. We basically depriving oneself of actually using enough energy to really support health and safety in the home environment. And that we see a lot. And it's, again, a management strategy, a coping and adaptive strategy, but it's one that and it's worse, not consuming energy to save. There are some kind of commendable qualities about it, but it actually kind of introduces, some specific challenges again, and especially extreme weather conditions like these heat waves. And the last part of the essential elements, so I just walked you through 9 of them, if you can believe it. But the last one is, what's the felt experience of energy insecurity? And this book and my work before this really kind of always drew a parallel and draws a parallel with food insecurity. And food insecurity is not only is it more understood, it's also kind of more central to policy and practice. A part of it is because many of us can relate to the idea of being hungry. And food insecurity, the felt experience of it is to be hungry. When it is consistent and persistent, it actually reaches a point of malnutrition. And similarly, when I was speaking to households around the country around and what it felt like to be energy insecure, they described feeling drained, like financially drained, physically drained, psychologically drained. And when you have these kind of persistent and consistent experiences of energy insecurity, it can be depleting. So those essential elements is like the diagnostic tools that allow us then to be able to say, how do we pick that up in surveys? But that fundamental foundational work in characterizing this phenomenon, I think, is the gift of this book in many ways.
Thank you so much. I feel like I really much better understand the challenge of quantifying an experience now and how you've had to um, learn from conversations about all these different, but then characterize in a clear way all these different dimensions. Thank you. I'd like to pivot next question to Commissioner Tovar. Um, can you shared a personal story about energy insecurity and lack of cooling when you're growing up. Can you talk a little bit about how your work with the city of Chicago has been aimed at tackling this issue for residents of the city?
Yes, thanks for the question, Mark. And I'll just say, Diana, I learn something from you every time I hear you talk about this important issue in your book and just now in laying out these 9 different elements. I think it's so important because I think when we think about energy insecurity, we often turn to the burden element, and I think that you just raised so many important points about how much more expansive it is, right? And how we can address this issue from different avenues. And I'll talk a little bit about, how we have reframed this work at the City of Chicago and why that's so important to us. I know later we'll talk about specific programs and ways in which we're doing this, but I think just the framing and the approach is important to spend time on. When I started in this role, and I think as we began to like build out our approach to how we're addressing issues of energy, there were important things. I felt like, just broadly, the community, the sustainability in community in Chicago really wanted me to focus on greenhouse gas emission reductions, which is so critical. I know that we're in the midst of a climate crisis. Um, and, I felt very strongly, that we had to do this in an equitable way, right? We had to understand the lived experience of people within the city of Chicago, acknowledging all of the elements that Diana just raised, and ensuring that we really understood it through that lens, and and designed approaches to addressing and building out our energy policy and our programs and our strategy to incorporate this through an equity lens. So there's a couple of things that we began to employ to incorporate it into our work to better address it, acknowledging the lived experience of people within our community. One of that is understanding where there is opportunity to leverage co-benefits. We as the city, the city, when we arrived into this office and as we built it out over time, the city had not had a climate action plan for quite some time. And we knew that it was time to develop a new climate action plan. But we also understood that this was a moment in time to understand where we can think about alleviating some of these insecurities for people, designing co-benefits that people need now more than ever. And so, and really understanding that, we leveraged that opportunity to say every single one of these climate actions, including our energy commitments, to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, has to come with a co-benefit that's designed to ensure that the most vulnerable residents in the city can have some, relief from these insecurities or these vulnerabilities that they're facing, whether that is, access to improved infrastructure or improved health outcomes or relief in terms of, improved air quality, or ensuring that we are driving household savings through our energy programs. So through that framing, right, when you look at the city's climate action plan, every single action within the plan, including the very robust section on energy, is tied to some of these benefits that we understand have to be driven by our actions. And so as we as the team have been continuing to move on our policies and programs that are aiming to move these goals forward, that has been so critical for us. Who are the most vulnerable individuals within the city of Chicago? What is their lived experience? And how can we ensure that we're driving those community benefits, those co-benefits? So in addition to greenhouse gas emission reduction, what are those other really critical things that we have to ensure that we're delivering on in this moment? And one of the other important things that I'll mention too, and part of this practice, which is a work in progress, as you are working on things through an equity lens, the most critical thing for us is to continue to treat that as an exercise, as a practice. We cannot just, be practitioners of equity and, take a couple of classes and think that we understand that. It's always a work in progress. And, I have a colleague who always says it's a muscle. You have to continue to practice to understand and how to do it right, and to continue to practice. for us, we have really tried to model what it is like to do co-governance in practice as an office, as a team, recognizing again how important it is not only to create tables where we're working with, researchers, or that we're working with technical assistance providers or, nonprofits or community organizations, but also ensuring that folks with lived experience, people within our communities, and particularly working with people who are experiencing the greatest vulnerabilities or the greatest insecurities, on these issues, that they are invited to and welcome at the table as well. And so that co-governance model, that is something that we have incorporated into, a wide range of strategies here at the city that have helped, informed our work and our policy solutions. And that has included things like, our environmental justice work. We, worked with epidemiologists and a group of community folks um, and various environmental justice leaders across the city to create a cumulative impacts map using social and health indicators to identify communities that are experiencing high levels of vulnerabilities to help us design policy solutions there. And then even within our decarbonization work, right? And Anne can remember back when we started talking about decarbonization a few years ago as a city and really understanding how we can prioritize this and address this, for all of our built environment as a city. Our initial conversations there were a lot of architects and designers in the room, right? But nobody was talking to people in communities of what that felt like in their apartment or their single family home. And, going back to Diana's book and her research, I think that it's so important that she does call out and, really expands on, the built environment element of it, right? The poor insulation or the malfunctioning AC or the infrastructure within the home, and how much of a challenge that is, right? And so really designing processes within the city so that we can understand and incorporate that element of it as well to think about our solutions. So it's been really a balance of recognizing how, the urgency of addressing these, as the city's chief sustainability officer and as this office, of recognizing the urgency, but also understanding that if we don't prioritize and better understand and design solutions to ensure that the most vulnerable Chicagoans are prioritized first, that we are going to fail. And, that has been the charge here in this office for many years now, and is something that, as we continue to grow and expand, and as Anne mentioned, our department is getting bigger, we're adding new capacity, we're onboarding new folks, and it has been so critical that we maintain that as a value. We are, anybody that comes through the hiring process here understands this is a mission-driven department. Our work is to ensure that we are designing solutions to alleviate these energy insecurities and other vulnerabilities that Chicagoans are facing, and that is our mission, first and foremost, and everything else comes after that.
Thank you. I'm sure folks in the audience can sense the difference that you and your team bring to the typical sustainability, planning process. And as a program manager myself, I understand that difficulty of balancing like decarbonization goals with affordability. It's something I'm sure a lot of our audience is dealing with directly in their work. Thank you for kind of grounding us in the lived experience, in the importance of lived experience. So I want to go back to Dr. Hernández, because you mentioned you've been in 1,000 homes, and your book weaves really powerful stories from more than 100 households. So going back to this, like grounding in lived experience, could you please share one or two personal stories from the book that really jumped out to you or that have stayed with you?
Oh my gosh, I have stories for days, but I think one of the stories that definitely stands out, there are two that I want to highlight. One is Alicia's story. That's a really kind of an anchor story in the book, and in many ways, like the story is mundane as they come, right? This is someone who is living in subsidized housing, um, you know, is a mom. She has I think 5 children. She experienced several losses. Her mom passed away. She had a work limiting injury at work that made it then difficult for her to maintain employment. She relied very heavily on her father for help, but she went to the energy assistance office the first thing in the morning, like got on the line with a $480 utility bill that had a disconnection, like an urgent disconnection notice on it. And but for that disconnection notice, she would have kind of gotten by in the ways that she had been getting by, which is like making partial payments, asking for family and friends for help. But at this point, it was really clear that, there was kind of this urgency in addressing this. Um, in the past, she had lived through disconnections, and it wasn't actually like a distant past. So this is someone who has like kind of a recurrent risk around energy insecurity and disconnections. And she recalled not reaching out to her family, her dad in particular, who was a main source of support, because she felt embarrassed and she didn't want to like continue to have to draw on him. As a source of help. So she finally goes to the energy assistance office because she's like, there's no way that my children can be without like a working refrigerator, and like, needing to, she was trying to salvage whatever food she could during the context of that disconnection. And it was just such a harsh lesson. In life we have sometimes these harsh lessons that remind us we never want to go back there. So at that point, she like held that disconnection notice in, her hand, and was like, I'm going to solve this issue. And the end, actually, like, I think, and this is kind of a recurring issue too in the book and with many of the stories, is that the resolution is partial, because outside of actually doing the sorry, I got distracted by Deborah's chat. So, in addition to the kind of economic piece, when she went home, like the electrical sockets were popping, and at least that's how she described it. She lived without an air conditioning unit. The landlords, the property management, they turned over a lot, but they never really wanted to deal with the lack of heating. This is a person living in Memphis, so it gets really cold and really hot. And she would go to a friend's house basically and say this was the only place where the kids could roam around and never have to worry about being too hot or too cold, right? Like, brown water was like, kind of when she would turn on the faucet, there would be brown water kind of passing through because they always had different kind of plumbing issues. And meanwhile, she's doing all this work, like turning on her stove and oven, because that's what the management company basically said, work it out on your own, the heating issues. But so there's a chapter in the book about the structural determinants of energy insecurity, and how do we locate that story that has all of the different, like, checks all of the different boxes around those essential elements of energy insecurity, and think about that in the context of these macro circumstances, social, economic, political, environmental, that are actually causing someone like Alicia to be so much more at risk for energy insecurity, right? That is actually, it's patterned, and it's not only patterned in her life. In all of our survey data, we saw again and again the populations that are most at risk, right? low income, households of color, households with children, people living in older homes that hadn't been renovated, right? These are all of the kind of pattern characteristics. So when we think about like the solution side, and I think later on I'll be able to read some excerpts of the book. I really want to be thinking about how do we solve this complex set of issues and problems for someone like Alicia. And she's a renter. How do we kind of prioritize that part? Because I think sometimes a lot of the solutions that are available presume that people own their properties and renters are really left behind. Another kind of characteristic of vulnerability when it comes to energy insecurity. So I think that there's hope, but I think we have to be very, very intentional about how we see a person kind of the so I did these interviews mostly in energy assistance offices, not exclusively, but they're coming through a door. And when they're coming through that door, how do we actually be more comprehensive in how we identify the kinds of issues that they're presenting with and then solve of that for them? I want to say one little a second story about Edith. That's a chapter 5 about Edith and her home. And basically, this was the family home. She grew up in it, grew up with her cousins in it. It was a lively place until it wasn't. And she went back home to take care of her dying father. And what she inherited was essentially a dying home. But how do we kind of think about homes as places that need to be reinvigorated? We think about people, we think about communities, but like that housing piece is so critical because our housing stock has actually been lacking in love and attention. And that is actually what, again, she walked in a door also dealing with a disconnection notice, but left with not only an unsolved housing problem, but was ultimately displaced from that home. And one of the things that we talk about in the book is like today's disconnection is tomorrow's eviction. So there is this kind of synergistic relationship between people being unable to pay their utility bills, but then also being dislocated and displaced from a housing perspective that we have to be paying a little bit more attention to as well.
Thank you so much for sharing both Alicia's and Edith's story. And in particular, in Alicia's story, I can really see how her story fits into the criteria or the essential elements that you talked about, most notably coping, all the work she had to do, as well as the felt experience, the embarrassment, right, and the unwillingness to ask family members. So thanks for sharing that. I want to pivot now to a question for Dr. Evans. As a practitioner, this work resonates very well with Elevate's mission. I know that. I work for Elevate too. But can you share how these types of stories or how this book in particular has impacted you and share how it's impacted the way you see Elevate's work directly helping these communities?
Thank you for that question. At Elevate, our mission is to design and implement clean energy and clean water upgrade programs focusing on communities that maybe experience lower incomes, communities of color, all the communities that Diana mentioned, communities with families with children, maybe multi-generational families, and all the families that Diana mentioned are structurally impacted by energy insecurity. And as we think about the design and implement part of our mission, we need to hear these stories. We need to understand the complexities and challenges that people are facing so that we can design programs that are accessible to the folks that need this work the most, and that they can come to us at any point in their journey, because it is a journey. And I think the other piece of it that's really important in our approach, and that this Diana's work has, and Angela's work have taught me and impacted me, is that it takes partnerships. Because folks are not only just managing how do they get to the next bill, they may also, and not only they may be, in almost all circumstances, they're also managing and carrying debt. And so the bill assistance programs, the utility bill relief programs are also important. And we have to partner with so many different parts of the broader ecosystem in order to one, help people where they are, and then also help them get to a better place where we can actually start removing some of the energy insecurity and improving people's lives.
Thank you. It really pertinent to the idea of this being an invisible, often invisible issue and needing to design programs or interventions that can capture people at different points. Dr. Hernandez is talking to people that walked in a door, that made a decision, that took action, right? But there's how many are not walking in that door and are harder to reach because of it with interventions like those that Elevate does. I'd like to ask Commissioner Tovar a question now. You talked a lot about what the city's been doing and how you've been leading on this. Do any of this data surprise you about the prevalence or the severity of energy insecurity? Do these stories surprise you at all? And how do they change the way that you approach your work?
Yeah, I think none of this surprises me. And I think, really understanding this again, from a community focused lens, as Dr. Hernandez shared in the beginning, is so critical. We really have to, I have certainly had the experience of working within an energy program that was not designed by the people who were experiencing the greatest insecurities in this space, right? And there were so many hurdles and barriers that we had to overcome to reach the success for this specific energy program that I worked on in New York. And so now in shifting my role and understanding how we can better design solutions, we've tried to do that with a great deal of intentionality of understanding what those barriers have been historically within these energy programs and how we can design programs that are tied to better outcomes. And it's certainly not perfect. I think that it's still a work in progress. A lot of these programs are challenging largely because of paperwork, and there's language access issues, and there's a whole host of other wraparound services that are needed to provide for people to even enter these programs, right? If you think about the experience of people just having to have all of their paperwork, or again understanding English to access programs, those certainly present barriers. And so it certainly hasn't been perfect. It's always a work in progress for us, but we are very committed to and have tried over the years to better design programs to address this issue. I'll mention one of the programs that we're working on that we're very excited about, which is a program that we do in partnership with Elevate and another organization called Zero Homes. The city has a program called Green Homes Chicago, which is one of the largest low income decarbonization programs in the country, if not the largest. I don't want to claim it's the largest because I don't know if there's anything out there, but else out there. But we are, making a commitment and have, committed millions of dollars as the city of Chicago to address this, both at the multifamily level and the 1 to 4 family level, of ensuring that we are doing whole home retrofits. And again, going back to that super important co-benefit piece, not only ensuring that we are, you know, prioritizing folks that are low income. But we're treating it as a, incorporating elements, and have been learning a great deal from our partners at the Department of Housing, who have had a home repair program for decades. So oftentimes, even with energy programs, right? You may be coming in and you will say, if I have an energy program and I say I can give you free insulation, you're income qualified. A lot of those programs are narrowly looking at things that they can do without understanding that, with these insecurities, with these aging households comes things like, disrepair or mold or other things. And so we've had to design a program that incorporates those measures so that we are not only transitioning the home to cleaner technologies or providing energy measures to lower the energy consumption of the home, but that we're also expanding that menu to include those repair elements too. We want to fix your roof. We want to make sure that we're addressing the mold issue. We understand that we have to provide measures so that we can fix your walls and provide new drywall if necessary. And so, that is an example that of one way in which we've better designed our programs together based on the lived experience of people within the city who have shown us, if we are going to do this correctly, we have to understand how to holistically address that. And again, there are very, I'm sure that there are challenges with this program that we are continuing to improve upon, particularly with, the income verification process. And that is something that we are committed to improving. But in terms of the program right now, and the expansive list of measures, it's a demonstration that, not only has the city, the Department of Environment and the Department of Housing, but also being informed by the community residents and our partners, Elevate and Zero Homes, we have collectively heard from and understand that we can do better in terms of how we advance programs like these. So we're very proud of the success. Green Home Chicago is a new program. We've allocated, as I mentioned, about over $20 million as the city to address this program. We're in our first year. I think we have about have about 80 households within the city that are moving through the program successfully. And even years prior to that, we worked with Elevate to understand what the typical suite of measures. Some really understood from a research element. Did a lot of work in modeling to understand different building typologies within the city and what that looked like before we even got to the program phase. And so we're very excited about the success of Green Homes and hope that that can be a model of how we can better address this in a more holistic way.
Thank you. Having worked on a few programs in my career with a similar experience as yours that just didn't feel like they were, resonating and overcoming the right barriers, I'm really optimistic that when I look out, I see a lot of jurisdictions like City of Chicago being so intentional in program design. So I think that is something that gives me hope. I want to ask one more question for Dr. Evans, and then I'd like to, we're going to take a 5-minute break to give everyone a breather. And then when we come back, we'll take Q&A from the audience. So to everyone in the audience, please be submitting questions for any or all of our panelists in the chat, and we'll be reviewing that during our break. So the last question for Dr. Evans, something Dr. Hernández talked about is how in the economic element of energy insecurity, there are both acute experiences like utility shutoffs, but also chronic ones like persistent energy debt. How can we think about and address energy insecurity as both that momentary crisis, but also a chronic condition?
Yeah, and I think that question picks up on a theme we were talking about earlier, which is listening to people in the community when they reach out, and also when they're in need and maybe unable to reach out. To understand what is the immediate need. And I think that you know, as having been involved in program design and implementation for a long time, oftentimes solutions are created in silos to address particular outcomes and fail to do that part of listening and understanding what are the needs in the community, what are the needs for particular families, which is again why Dr. Hernandez's work is so critically important for people like us who are hoping to do a good job, hoping and struggling and working to do a good job at meeting the needs of families and communities. And so I think we have to meet people where they are. Sometimes people reach out to us because they have an emergency heating situation or an emergency cooling situation. And I think we have to address that need. But we can also hopefully develop a good, strong relationship that when they're ready, we can come back and offer energy efficiency, maybe insulation, maybe new appliances. And then we can also help them with the disrepair that Commissioner Tovar mentioned of finding, and sometimes we're working in partnership with other housing upgrade organizations. So maybe we can help them get a new roof that then helps them get to the next stage and maybe incorporate a solar option in that helps them reduce their bill over time. So it's these different components of energy efficiency, managing all the different energy uses in your home, solar and appliance upgrades that can include moving from fossil fuels to electrification, and listening enough and being in touch enough to be able to know how, when and how to move forward, whether or not you're a homeowner or a renter. There are so many different solutions now. Community solar, you don't have to own your own roof. There are lots of different options, but just making sure that we're listening to the needs and bringing the options that work best for that household, for that family, that's going to help them get out of the urgent situation of I'm facing a disconnection or I have no heat, into a more a stronger situation that helps them guard against the future volatility that I'm pretty sure, I'm not good at predicting most things, but I'm pretty sure we're going to see some volatility in energy prices. And then, of course, layering in those debt relief programs so that people are unburdened and able to thrive outside of this constant chronic situation of energy insecurity.
Thank you so much. I really like your emphasis on the need for programs to be designed such that they create relationships over the long term. That's something that I don't see in many programs. They're designed to address an urgent need, but not a chronic need. And that goes, of course, back to the social determinants that Dr. Hernandez was talking about. Okay, we're all going to take a quick break to grab some water, let everyone get check your email and take a breather. We're going to be back at 3:05 Central Time by my clock, and we'll prepare Q&A that we're receiving from the chat, and then we will end with a really exciting reading of a book passage by Dr. Hernandez. So thank you. We'll see you in 5 minutes.
Mark, I was wondering who would join first.
I figured I'd be the signal. My face. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for allowing our panelists to have a quick break and grab some water. Been receiving a couple of really good questions, so I'd like to just keep going. One of the ones that I wanted to tackle, it could be for anybody, any of our panelists. What are some of the more innovative solutions that you've seen in recent years to address energy insecurity? Or what additional ideas and solutions do you think are needed to really get a systems change? Yeah, Dr. Evans?
You know, one of the things that we saw happen during COVID is that income verification and enrollment in various programs suddenly got a lot easier. I see one of the consistent barriers to participating in any program is often the income verification process. So I was intrigued to see all the innovation that happened during COVID and wondering if our current energy and security crisis might be a reason to bring some of those innovations back and make it easier for people to apply and participate.
Thank you.
Likewise, I think in that same period, I really do think that we had rapid response policy making and program design that was like intended to be less administratively burdensome. And that I think is an important like checkbox of things that we should be kind of aspiring to more often. But I would say also that the IRA, as it was intended, in terms of really creating pathways for not just, providing tax breaks and incentives for installing heat pumps and efficiency and improving insulation, et cetera. But to do that and prioritize disadvantaged communities first and foremost, I thought that that was important. Of course, so much of what's happening now is kind of rolling back and dismantling a lot of those efforts, but there's also been like at the city scale, in terms of like local municipal utilities, the idea like LA Department of Water and Power, really eliminating disconnections, banning disconnections for low income populations and banning it universally during extreme weather events. To me, those are also like important pathways to saying that we value and see the importance of this and believe that we need to find other paths to make sure that we can do cost recovery more effectively. So I feel like those are also promising innovations there.
Maybe Mark, if I can, I'll pick up on that thread about utilities, and I know that there's a couple of questions. So maybe I don't want to get too much ahead of you, but I think that it's also important. I know someone raised the issue and the threat of LIHEAP being eliminated, and of course, we know that here in the state of Illinois, that's hundreds of thousands of households that receive assistance from LIHEAP every year, and that makes a tremendous difference. And I think just going back, who will that burden fall on? If folks, whose responsibility does that become if the federal government does not provide that service, that needed service, and does that responsibility then go to the utility? And if it does, we have a system in which oftentimes when utilities spend money, that the recovery of those funds falls on the customer, the ratepayer, right? And we are also in a moment where we are in a service territory, and everybody within the PJM, our utility market, is experiencing increased rates of our utility bills because of the market dynamics, which caused us to have which caused the price of electricity to go up, and that in turn put that responsibility back on the homeowner or on the ratepayer. So we're already seeing increased rates at least $10 a month here in the city of Chicago. And then if we have to think about, the utility expanding their programs and services to support residents who could be at any level that Dr. Hernandez described, whether that be, experiencing burden or all the way to the extreme of experiencing shutoffs, and then recovering that investment by charging more to the ratepayers. We are going to experience a dynamic where we're just in this perpetual cycle of, having to pay to support folks, and then, having the ratepayers pay back that service, and we have to find ways out of that cycle. And I think there's a critical importance in this moment of having to advocate at the utility level for real shareholder dollars, investments that are not recoverable by the ratepayer, but that are the responsibility of the utilities to invest in real energy efficiency solutions, to invest and partner with cities, to support real dollars that are invested in communities, and to ensure that we are braiding utility incentives with the programs that we're designing so that we can expand the amount of buildings, multifamily or 1 to 4 family buildings that we are reaching through our programs. Those are critical ways in which the utility can partner with cities. For folks on the line that are in Chicago, we've been trying to pursue a franchise agreement with our utility for quite some time. That work was paused largely because we spent so much time at the Illinois Commerce Commission to advocate for and to have a presence in ensuring that we're fighting for the ratepayers of Chicago to have lower rates at a time when both of our utilities were proposing rate hikes. And so we did prioritize that, but one thing that we would like to do is return back to that franchise agreement, and to ensure that we can, deliver on programs and policies and investments that get at the heart of this as well. And there are some really good models of, cities that have had some success there. Minneapolis being one model of, where they were able to align on a suite of commitments with their utility a few years back. I think that was over 10 years ago now. But then even more recently, the city of Ann Arbor was able to align on a partnership with their utility this year. So that's really inspiring work and something that we hope to continue to pursue at the city level. And we really see our role as both, holding our utilities accountable on behalf of the residents of the city of Chicago. And in addition to that, ensuring that we can deliver a unique partnership that really delivers on the investments that people need to ensure that we are breaking that cycle of, both investing and then charging the ratepayers back for the investments that we've made at the utility level.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. I know you just spoke, but there's a good question in the chat that came in that I think you can answer, because a common theme in our discussion today has been programs that are too narrowly focused, or in your words, don't recognize co-benefits enough. Can you just talk briefly about how does your office coordinate efforts with other city agencies to more holistically address issues?
Yeah, I think, and thank you for that. I think that, I'll go back again to the, we talked a little bit about our partnership with the Department of Housing, and that partnership extends beyond just Green Home Chicago. Green Home Chicago is a great example of learning from their repair program and understanding where there are opportunities to expand our suite of measures within Green Home Chicago, which I think is very important. but our work extends, far beyond just this one program. Our Department of Housing, of course, is charged with addressing housing insecurity, right? And so these are all parallel issues, and are oftentimes impacting the same communities, very frequently. And so, and really understanding how we can work together. We have really developed a working partnership over the years to think about how our work can complement one another. Another example of this is green social housing, which is a policy that was just passed at the city, which is very exciting, which essentially says, there is a dire need in the city of Chicago for more low-income housing. We're building a revolving loan fund, which we've already established, and have now passed a policy to create the bylaws and the the operational infrastructure needed to operate that entity, right? The entity that will oversee the revolving loan fund. But that gives access to capital for low income developers to start building more affordable housing in the city. And with that, through our work, ensures that we're building with the highest energy standards so that we can avoid this type of energy insecurity in the future, right? We want to ensure that we are, working with our Department of Housing to incorporate design standards and energy measures and clean energy technologies, so that we can, think proactively about how, to avoid these types of situations in the future. And to ensure that we are, again, just advancing this commitment to, providing more accessible housing that can alleviate this burden for people. And so that's an exciting avenue that we're pursuing as well. And then, just very briefly, I'll just say, we've also incorporated measures within their own technical design standards, right? So working with the Department of Housing to ensure that any building that they built with public funding also incorporates the same technologies. If we can incorporate these measures in the future, and this is a preventative approach, it certainly isn't going to impact everybody. There are people that are experiencing this insecurity now, and that is important to recognize. And we can also, hopefully through more intentional efforts to design better outcomes for new construction, avoid that in the future. And we have to do both, right? We have to ensure that we're addressing it for people that are experiencing now, and also we can prevent that in the future by building better buildings. And that's what we are trying to do with our Department of Housing.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Tovar. Thanks for letting me ask you multiple questions there on the spot. I want to give our last question to Dr. Evans real quick, and then we're going to give the floor and to take us home to Dr. Hernández to read us a passage from her book. So thank you to all who have submitted questions. I'm sorry we didn't get time for all of them. Dr. Evans, we've had a couple of questions on the theme. I think this theme of just worry and nervousness about funding and looking for ideas or advice from you on solutions for sustainable funding for a lot of the programs that have been mentioned. We also have a similar question around what would you say to young professionals who are just entering this field, who are concerned about energy insecurity, at the moment where everything is going on with taking away funding for these programs. Do you have any words of advice?
Yes, to young professionals, please join us. We need you. This is a long struggle that we're in. As Dr. Hernández wrote about in her book, this impacts so many families. 40% of families are at risk for energy insecurity. So we need to build a workforce, and we need new ideas. So we welcome you. And I think I always tell people, follow your passion. And if you feel passionate about working on solutions that address energy insecurity, yeah, we need you. Please join us. With regard to funding, there's so many different funding sources. We have to continue to shed light, lift up stories, shed light on the issues and lift up stories, and so that policymakers can make good decisions about how dollars are spent. And I will also say that energy and housing are state and local issues. And so use your voice, join us, and share your ideas.
Thank you so much. I knew you'd have words of wisdom on that question. What an inspiring conversation. A huge thank you to our panelists for the insight, for your leadership, and for creating space in your day to talk about such a vital issue. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here and for your thoughtful questions and your engagement all the way to the end. And our last thing before we officially close, we have a special treat. Dr. Diana Hernandez will now read a brief passage from her new book titled Powerless: The People's Struggle for Energy. Thank you, Dr. Hernandez.
Thank you all, and Mark, again, really fabulous facilitator. Angela, I feel like you have you are in a starring role in making all of this real and also forward thinking and anchored. What I love about today's conversation is that we represent three sectors that don't interact, enough together: the community-based nonprofit, the government, and academia. And thank you so much for your legacy of work and leadership in this space. And I want to tell all of the young people before I start reading that, in order to actually see change, you have to kind of stay committed. I think sometimes it's tempting to follow something new, but the whole idea about being mission oriented and driven by passion and commitment is also about sticking with stuff. And someone recently called me an OG, which I kind of feel like I'm a little too young for, but I will take the fact that yes, I've been at this for a long time. And I think that that's an important demonstration of how committed I am, and so many others, including Ann and Angela on this call. So thank you. I want to just read 2 pages, one section in the structural determinants of energy insecurity chapter of the book. It's on page 204 and 205. And it's called Triaging Energy Insecurity. And I already shared the backstory of Alicia, but this passage is really about what happens if we work together and actually resolved and relieved the conditions that are burdening Alicia. What would that look like? And so I'll start. It's called Triaging Energy Insecurity. What follows is a hypothetical scenario that imagines energy insecurity as a diagnosable problem that, like other diseases, could be treated with social, economic, and housing interventions. The goal of this thought exercise is to recognize that there are paths forward beyond the current crisis intervention approach, which has thus far been the primary focus of quote unquote treatment for energy insecurity. If there were such a thing as an energy clinic and Alicia's household was our patient, we could implement a customized treatment plan targeting the specific aspects of energy insecurity she experienced. First, we would seek to address the immediate crisis by providing resources to pay the $480 arrearage to avert the impending disconnection. This approach would address the immediate economic crisis. However, we would also aim to enroll her in all eligible utility discount programs, energy assistance benefits, and disconnection protections to reduce future financial burdens and minimize the risk of disconnection. As a next step, we would focus on the physical dimensions of energy insecurity by replacing the missing air conditioning unit and repairing or replacing the heating system to enable the family to be comfortable at home and avoid using the stove for heat. To further address the housing unit's repair needs and deferred maintenance in the broader residential complex, we would rectify electrical and plumbing problems and implement weatherization measures such as sealing drafts, upgrading to efficient lighting and appliances, and adding insulation as appropriate. Once these critical issues were stabilized, again, thinking about this as a kind of a treatable condition, We would also want to identify sources of economic and social support to ease Alicia's financial constraints and sole caretaking responsibilities. This might involve enrolling the family in all the social service benefits to which they are entitled, identifying educational and recreational programs for the children to support their healthy development and free up some of Alicia's time while connecting her to employment opportunities that paid a living wage and were suited to her skill level and health status. Earning a decent income and enrolled in a full suite of supportive services, Alicia would be able to pay her utility bills on time and in full, avoiding debt and disconnection risks while also keeping up with other household expenses, thereby limiting the need to make very difficult choices such as paying the light bill or buying her son a new pair of shoes. The family would also be able to achieve comfort at home throughout the year because the bills would be manageable relative to Alicia's earnings, and the home would be well equipped to deliver efficient heating and cooling while avoiding heat loss and or retention. The health benefits of these interventions might be reflected in the family's ability to get a decent night's rest, reducing the children's asthma triggers and lowering overall stress levels. Establishing a routine and enrolling the household in health benefits would ensure that Alicia and her family had access to the services of primary care physicians and specialists, including physical therapy for her back injury and therapeutic services to address the family's mental health and support their healing from trauma. Triumphant in overcoming energy insecurity, Alicia might start writing letters to her city council representatives and participating in advocacy efforts to reform rate structures and disconnection practices at the municipal utility to ease hardships for low-income customers. Now feeling passionate about addressing energy insecurity and other issues such as crime, education, healthcare, and quality of life in her neighborhood and others like it, Alicia might even feel encouraged to run for office. She could leverage her lived experience, her lived expertise of escaping the grip of energy insecurity, as well as her problem-solving skill set to tackle the climate crisis that is leading to extreme heat and wild weather. In doing so, she would focus her efforts on decarbonizing the energy system and teaching classes on energy conservation and survival skills to mass audiences. She might even write a book about her life to inspire others. This reimagination of how a victim of energy insecurity becomes a victor in her community and in the fight against climate change need not be so far-fetched. Such a trajectory can be catalyzed by changes to our social safety net and investments in our nation's housing stock that presume that people deserve to earn a living wage, live in decent housing, and enjoy a healthy and dignified life that offers purpose, freedom to pursue passions, and hope. And I'll end it there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you to Commissioner Tovar and Dr. Evans as well. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Hernandez's book, we're going to drop a link in the chat. To stay updated on the City of Chicago's sustainability initiatives, follow the Department of Environment on social media. And of course, to keep up with Elevate's work, sign up for our newsletter and follow us on our social platforms. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to hopefully continuing this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. End of recording.